next question. Kate's written about a potential political realignment that unfortunately looks increasingly likely. How big of an obstacle would that represent to a Green New Deal project? And what's our best chance apart from Bernie for preventing it? Which I guess speaks to also what happens if Bernie's not the nominee or the president as much as we would all like to see it.
Yeah, it's a good question. For folks who have not read that article, just to summarize, I sort of talk about the possibility of the stimulus package and, you know, the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus and ensuing economic downturn, sort of seeing the US right and sort of Trump's people in particular kind of discover this thing that has existed in Europe for, you know, a long time, which is the sort of marriage of xenophobic, racist, kind of hard borders policy with generous social spending. So probably the best example of this in Europe is Marine Le Pen and the sort of rebranded what was the Front National is now the National Assembly. And sort of, you know, something that has been called kind of welfare chauvinism, essentially appealing to the economic well-being of white people in this, you know, or, you know, this very sort of scary definition of who gets, you know, included in basic services, because the right in the United States has been so close to corporate America. It's never really developed that. It's never really had the sort of language to talk about a big welfare state or that, you know, as being something a right-wing project would be interested in. There's been sort of attempts over the years. You saw Steve Bannon trying to do this several years ago. Is still trying to do it in some ways. Tucker Carlson, I think, is probably a person who articulates this position the best. Just because of the amount of corporate money, again, in the GOP, that has never really taken off in the same way. And the thing that, you know, seemed true, you know, last week and the week before, and seems probably more true this week, is that that might be changing, right? You might see a Trump administration potentially, which sees, you know, big social spending, over $1 trillion potentially, as the key to a re-election, seeing, you know, we'll send out $1,000, $2,000 checks to every American, you know, put Trump's face on it, whatever, and you could have that paired with potentially a Democratic nominee in Joe Biden, who is a lifelong deficit hawk, who, you know, has spent much of his career arguing for cutting Social Security, for reining in entitlements, for, you know, constraining the deficit and putting, you know, as he's put it, everything on the table in terms of scaling back, you know, essentially the kind of New Deal order. And I think that creates a sort of really scary place for American politics. And I think, you know, the answer to that is not, I won't pretend this is a complete answer, but I think it is, you know, what the challenge has been to Democrats for a long time, which is, you know, just the force of social movements and kind of forcing people's hand into doing something better, right? I think, you know, I will be very happy if Bernie becomes the nominee. I'm not sure how likely that is at this point. I think it's, you know, important to work toward. Certainly, but I think, you know, there was never going to be a scenario in which there wasn't a challenge to be made at whoever was in the White House. I think Bernie himself has been clear that, you know, it's not me, it's us, and that, you know, there would be a sort of relationship between social movements pushing for more and people on the inside, even if he were in office. And I think, you know, the balance there is different. If Joe Biden is in the White House, I'm slightly skeptical he gets there if this is really kind of where politics is heading. Would love to be proven wrong. If he's the nominee, I would, you know, rather have anything else than former years of Trump, of course. But I think the answer is just to, you know, mobilize people around it. And I think Bernie's campaign has really helped crystallize a real coalition that is fighting for a different vision of the world than this sort of zombie neoliberalism that I think is on offer from Joe Biden, and can really, push for more. Whether that looks like enacting, Bernie's Green New Deal as it's laid out, I don't think that's the case. But I think, for instance, sort of publicly shaming his advisors who have taken, millions of dollars from the fossil fuel industry and keeping those people out of the administration is certainly kind of one path toward that, toward, really electing more people in Congress who can force his hand, and just, being clear to not repeat the mistakes of the early Obama era. If it does end up being Joe Biden in the White House, and not giving, essentially 3 years of buffer period before ramping up any pressure on him. And I think, certainly folks that I've talked to are sort of clear that will be the case. I think we have two different enemies, right? If it's Biden or Trump in the White House. And so I think the fight looks different depending on who's there, but it is a fight. Nonetheless, and I, am holding out some hope that we have champions in Congress like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, who can, really be the voice for a different kind of stimulus, and make that case, I think, more clearly than someone like Nancy Pelosi has so far.
Yeah, let me just pick up really quickly on that. I think that's totally right. I mean, I think first, until Bernie drops out, I mean, his campaign is the main leverage that we have right now. There are people who think we should just bail and then just have meetings with Biden's advisors. Yeah, fucking right. But that being said, yeah, I think, Roosevelt, look, Biden is no Roosevelt, period. Roosevelt also campaigned on a 25% budget cut. So there will be an opportunity if Biden somehow wins, becomes president, to push from below. There was no one really on the street fighting over the terms of the Obama stimulus in 2008, and we were not going to make that mistake again. There's not a chance in hell we're going to make that mistake again. There are going to be a lot of people on the streets. In addition, as exactly Kate was saying, there's the House of Representatives, there's the Squad and their friends, and there's the Senate. And at the end of the day, even if Bernie were in, the trouble would be getting something really good through the Senate and the House. And that's going to be the exact same trouble through Biden, except this time we're not going to wait for the PDF to come from the White House, but we're going to bring the PDF to DC in the streets. And I think there's going to be a big opportunity. And then, of course, 2021, the primaries start. Halfway through 2021, Biden will have already given up the presidency to Kamala or whoever his VP is. There's going to be the 2022 midterms, which hopefully will win. 2023 primary season for the presidential race. And that entire time, all the organizing we have to do on the ground that's outside of the electoral framework. So I think we sort of just have a huge amount of class struggle ahead of us pretty much no matter what. But there are still channels for getting green stimulus policies, egalitarian green investments on the table. And I don't think, Kate, I think we both really were excited about Bernie and thought that he could win. But I think we also both, I don't think any of us thought that the most radical and ambitious things were going to happen in 2021. I think for us, the Green New Deal decade is a decade, and it's going to take some building because we're not as strong on the left as they were even, let's say, in 33, 34. So we got to build, and winning elections is nice, but that's really going to be the symptom of that's going to be the expression of our strength, not the maker of our strength.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And just to add quickly a sort of, semi-hopeful anecdote from the New Deal itself is that some of the biggest programs that we remember from the New Deal, some of the most kind of radical parts of it, didn't come until the second New Deal, didn't come until after, there was a new class of people in office who really forced Roosevelt's hand in a big way, who had come out of social movements, who had come out of labor, and, really forcefully made that case from the halls of Congress, sort of bringing the full weight of, the strikes and the sort of outside agitation that was happening in. And so I think we're starting to already see the sort of foundations for that kind of relationship, and, in ways that are certainly better than they were in 1936. And so I think that's what gives me hope is that, none of this ends, right? None of this ends when Bernie drops out. Doesn't end on election day, no matter who's in office. That this is, sort of constant struggle. And as Daniel was mentioning at the beginning, we know that every, tenth of a degree translates into tens of thousands of lives. And so there's never sort of a case to be made for just, saying, well, we lost this one, give it up. This is, a decade of the Green New Deal, and that will be a decade of struggle. And, depending on who wins on November, that struggle will be more or less uphill.
Yeah. The only time you should ever imitate Nancy Pelosi is if you read a magazine with New York in the title and it has a middle-aged white man telling you that climate change is too late to stop and that you should just focus on your eggplant farm, or you should just focus on bird collections. And especially if the author of that article's first name is Jonathan, just tear it right up.
Deep cut.
Tear it right up.
I think that's a good, well, minus the little Nancy Pelosi tangent, I think that's a good bit to end on. Yeah, our fight doesn't necessarily end in November with whoever's elected. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep fighting and building power. And, as others have said, every tenth of a degree of warming that we stop is thousands and thousands of people's lives that we're helping to save. And especially in a city like Philly, where so many of us are marginalized and at risk, that means a lot. So yeah, we had this event going to 8:30, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, Kate and Daniel, for your great comments and participating in this discussion. Thank you, everyone who, lots of good comments in the chat. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody. I'm really excited that everyone is so pumped to talk about a Green New Deal. So like I said, I don't think this is going to be the last event we do. We were talking in the chat about a viewing night for some documentaries and Green New Deal and housing. So there's a lot more we can talk about this. A lot more we can say, and we're going to keep talking about it. Just some housekeeping bits. We're going to send out a follow-up email with a recording. We recorded this call, so there will be a recording. We're going to send a cleaned up transcript of the chat because there's some good questions and food for thought in there. It'll include a list of all the co-sponsoring groups, and in light of the COVID pandemic, we're going to send out a little resource sheet, which is by no means the end-all be-all. There's a bunch of these things floating around, but just a list of different resources for ways to get involved in Philly, mutual aid groups, resources, information that pertains to local organizing around the pandemic. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you, everybody. And good night. Unless someone else, Anthony or Mitch, you guys have something to say.
Can I just say just extremely quickly?
Yes.
I love this conversation. I think Kate and I are not specialists in Philadelphia politics, but we are both tracking things in Philly. I am more, obviously. And, you have people like Helen Gim in office, Kendra Brooks, who's just come in, people like Nikhil and Rick who are running. I think there's this call with dozens of people, on a Tuesday night. There's a huge amount of momentum for Philly-specific Green New Deal organizing, and that too can absolutely proceed no matter what happens federally. So I think we're both here and available and want to be involved in those conversations. And this is just it's a horrible time to be alive in many ways, but a very powerful time to be in the climate movement. And I think we can feel good about that. And there's work to do and people to do it with. And that's a good situation to be in, because I don't even know if it felt like that 3 or 4 years ago. So we have,
as a local climate organizer, I'm so fucking jazzed by the energy right now. Let's keep this going for sure. Mitch, do you want to take a minute and say something to wrap up? Which you said you did.
Oops, sorry, I did, but then I couldn't figure out how to unmute. Yeah, thanks so much to everyone for participating. Let me get myself on the screen here for a second. Yeah, I was really excited by all the energy and good ideas that are flowing. And just to say, there are yeah, like Sus said, we'll send out a list of all the groups, and there are a lot of conversations happening already about some of the ideas that were talked about here. There's organizing around improving public transit. There's organizing around getting electrified public transit in Philly as well. There's an informal coalition of groups that started meeting to talk about how we transform PGW into a utility that provides non-carbon heating services and transitions all the buildings in Philly to be heated with renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. And so I feel like, personally, I feel very overwhelmed, to be honest, at the moment by trying to like figure out how to do climate work in the current moment where people are struggling with where people who are already struggling with day-to-day survival needs are now struggling even more with even more intense survival needs. But I think we can figure out how to keep moving all the pieces ahead. And I'm really excited to work with folks who were on the call today on those things. So we'll be in touch about existing initiatives and maybe talking about how we can start some new initiatives.
Yes, let's do it. Green New Deal Philly, self-pretzels for all. All right. Once again, thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Solidarity forever. Love y'all. Have a good night. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, all.
Thank you.